Here we are. I have Rusty West, who is with us tonight. He is the president and CEO of MarketScan. And I want to thank you again for being on tonight with us, Rusty West. For those that may not necessarily be familiar with this channel, Becky Chernek, right? I have been providing the very best in finance and insurance training for auto dealers throughout the United States as well as in Canada. And so I said I offer customizing dealership training as well as workshops, and especially those customizing dealership training. I start from the time that that customer lands on that dealership website, working with your BDC managers as well as your salespeople and presentations and desking, working with that desk to make sure those deals are structured correctly, and then finalizing that transaction in the F&I office with the designated F&I manager as well as a single point sales associate or even hybrid. So here we are. Again, thank you so much, Rusty, for being on with us tonight. Talk to us a little bit about who you are, MarketScan, what's going on with your company.
Yeah. So listen, first, anytime I get an opportunity to spend a few minutes with Wonder Woman, I got to jump at it, right? So
Yeah.
I love the introduction. That's terrific.
Yeah.
MarketScan is a software company that focuses on automotive space. I founded it or co-founded it with my dad in 1988. So we've been around for a long time, and we've kind of zigged and zagged and reinvented ourselves as the need arose. But we're an automotive payments as a service solution. And with that, we ended up getting involved with a bunch of analytics and calculating a whole bunch of payments for all the different layers of the sales funnel, from ad tech all the way down to the DMS. And so, we get to see a lot of interesting stuff. We calculate roughly 250 million payments a day, and every one of those is a result of an API call. So we get to see all the information that's associated with that API call, which gives us great insight into what's going on in the market, which is one of the reasons why I was so excited to talk to you about, what's going on today, because things have changed a whole lot in the last 18 months.
Well, a lot of things have changed, and especially over the past 2 years. And we have Larry Feldman. Thank you so much for stopping in and saying hello. I'm glad you're here. So I'm sure we'll have plenty of others coming on. I hope we do. And certainly feel free to say hello and provide your feedback. But yeah, so here's the thing. I've known you for many, many years, being in the industry myself. And you have always been on top of providing the very best when it comes to helping dealers to streamline profit strategies, if you will, and being able to determine different options that would be made, lender options that would be made available to that customer as it pertains to different lenders that are available, depending upon what the customer likely can qualify for. You've always been very dynamic in that, in delivering that to dealers throughout the country.
Well, thanks. It's a whole philosophy is that there's only one scientifically perfect solution for any conceivable automotive transaction, and any solution that's imperfect has a negative result on a bunch of different sectors of the market, right? So if you're a consumer, if you end up in the wrong transaction, you're either paying too much a month for what you're driving a lesser vehicle than what you could afford, or you may just pass on the transaction because it doesn't fit your budget, right? And then if you look at it from a dealership standpoint, any solution that's less than perfect, you may just miss the customer because you're quoting payments that are too high, even though there might be a much cheaper payment out there, or you're leaving money on the table, right? So you have to kind of combine all this science, technology, and data to figure out what's best for the whole ecosystem. And it's been an interesting project for us, but it definitely makes a huge difference. One of the things that we're seeing more so now than ever, because of the lack of inventory, there's not anywhere near as many competitive captive lender programs. So a lot of times a non-captive program might have a payment that's 15, 20, 30% cheaper than the captive special program. And if you don't know that, you might be quoting a customer 50, 60, $70 a month higher than the guy up the street. You're going to miss the business, and he might be making more money than you were making at a cheaper monthly payment. So
Well, I think that there's a lot to be said about that, because I think dealers, for the most part, has had it pretty easy over the past couple years, right? Putting some of these deals together, and it's like, hey, hey, if you don't qualify, you're out of here. Next deal. So it's been that way, and I got to say, I wrote a blog recently in my newsletter blog for LinkedIn, and I was talking about grooming customers. And I talk about that because I remember years back when I was invited to go in, working with a dealer, and he was telling me, don't expect too much from this particular dealership, Beck. They're predominantly cash store, and they don't do a lot of tier 3 and 4 business. Well, you know how I felt about that, don't you?
yeah, right.
I'm like, where are they at?
Right.
Why aren't they there? It doesn't make any sense. And come to find out, well, he recently acquired the store, and so this is what he was told. But then he decided, you know what? I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to pay $40 for every write-up. We're going to just do that, Becky. We're going to pay $40 for every write-up. And immediately, what did we find? We found that, guess what? There's tier 3 and 4 customers. They
Yeah,
were grooming customers. So
right.
that's what I'm seeing happening today, more so than ever. It's like, hey, it's too easy. It's like, okay, well, if you don't fit into this or what we need you to fit into, you're out of here. Well, that's going to change again, and we got to get back to the skill set to be able to determine what does this customer actually qualify for. Um, Earlier on in that process, to be able to assure that we have that customer on the right vehicle to manage profitability, or otherwise, I don't think we're selling cars. You tell me, what do you think?
Yeah, it's a very, I think, solid foundation, right? What we're experiencing right now, I've talked about this with several people in the space. This is maybe the very best educational example that I've ever seen in my lifetime of the dynamics of the laws of supply and demand. Right? At the very beginning of COVID, nobody could leave their house. Dealers had a glut of inventory. Everybody panicked. They dumped all their vehicles, right? So they went really cheap. Now we got all this supply chain issues, war in Ukraine, all this kind of stuff, and we don't have that many vehicles. So they're being sold at a premium, and they're being sold easily, right? For the most part, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's just like anything else, if it's easy every single time, you lose your polish, right? And you lose the practice. So there's going to be a tremendous amount of unrest in the automotive space here in the not too distant future. There's we're going to see repossessions. There's all kinds of predictions that we'll see repossessions higher than we've ever seen since the advent of the automobile. We're going to see massive amounts of restructuring of transactions, not just refinancing, but replacement of the aftermarket products that were sold. So you're going to have yield losses at lending institutions, and you're going to have chargeback provisions at dealers. And then when the whole dynamic really gets screwy and we have inventory, then it's going to be very challenging to get a car deal right. And I think if we, like you said, if we lose the skill set required to properly work with the customer, to properly go through the sales process, to properly manage their expectations, match them with the right vehicle, get them with a vehicle that they can truly afford. If we lose that skill set, then we're going to be in trouble. And the dealers, I think, who are really focusing on polishing that process now are going to be the ones that clean up.
Yeah, I'm hoping that dealers realize that maybe some of their skill set isn't up to where it needs to be. And frankly, over time, I have seen where F&I people, that skill set has eroded. We're not getting out. We're not meeting customers. We're not figuring out better ways for an approval. In fact, I can tell you how many times, well, Becky, that's not happening like it used to. In fact, it's all about AI and internal scoring. So they're not going to go ahead and budge. And that really is not the case. I mean, are we, and especially when we talk about the desk, I mean, how do we know that we made sure to land the customer on the right car to begin with? And again, this goes back to skill set.
Sure.
and figuring that stuff out sooner rather than later. Because if we don't have it figured out sooner rather than later, that customer's ending up and maybe ending up into that F&I office. And we're finding out that, you know what, it's hard to go ahead and put these deals together and maximize the profit the way that it's being maximized, or the F&I performance today. And that's where there's going to be some problems on that. So I want to talk a little bit more about when you say restructure by the lender. I want to hit on that because I don't know how many car people realize that lenders may be contacting customers to restructure their deals. Can you kind of hit on that a little bit more?
Yes, I think there's kind of three plays here, right? One
Okay.
play is the refinance play, right? Which is, customers in a 72-month finance, they did not get offered the special program because there was no rate markup in it. So he qualified for 0.9%. He got put in a program at 7.9% when the buy rate was 5.9%. Right. So his payments are high. Dealer made, $2-3 grand in the back end.
That's right.
And they get a call from a very heavily funded bank that says, hey, we can drop your payment $35 a month. Same number of payments you've got, sign here.
Now, let me ask you a question. I didn't mean to cut you off. Okay. So is that with the same lender that they're currently with? Are we talking about another company altogether marketing to that customer to be able to restructure the loan, maybe keep the products in, or maybe gut those products out and upgrade different products?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So it's not going to be from the lending institution that wrote it. The lenders, the way the deals are structured right now, or I say it's not going to, my opinion, it's not going to be right because the lending institution, if the deal's written at 7.9%, the dealership got paid reserve on it. The revenue that pays back that reserve that was paid to the dealer trickles into the lending institution in the way of yield over the length of that contract or over the life of that contract over 72 months. So if we refinance that thing early at a lower rate, there's no chargeback provisions on it after maybe 90 or after 3 or 4 payments, then we never realize as a lending institution the revenue from the customer to cover the pay to cover the reserve that was paid to the dealership. So I don't think it'll be, this bank refinancing their own. What we think it'll be conquest. It'll be one lending institution going after another lending institution's portfolio, which is going to cause, I think, a tremendous amount of loss from the various lending institutions whose contracts are getting rewritten. And, so if we look at it just as a refinance piece, that's how I see it's probably going to play out. There's more lenders, there's more well-funded lenders coming into the refinance space than at any time in the car business. So it's crazy.
Thank you. And I mean, you're sharing this, and I have been trying to share the same information, and I don't know. I think a lot of this is it's new. It's happening in the past 6 to 8 months, maybe 6 months. I mean, where these refi companies are lining up, ready to go ahead and pounce that very minute that public record is available, to market to the customer, to offer better terms. And from there, so not only that, but it's gutting out the products that the customer was sold at the dealership. So, okay, so maybe that's going to affect the reserve that was made. But on top of that, let's say it's 90 days later. So let's say dealer goes, "Oh, I'm off the hook. I don't worry about that reserve chargeback." I get that, but what about the products? And I'm hearing TPAs are like frantic right now.
Yeah. So on the refinance part, typically I don't think that the dealer gets bit from the products because they're refinancing the whole package, right? What we're seeing, there's a couple of companies that are spooling up that are going to go after a restructure of the transaction as opposed
Okay, that's where they're getting
that's where I think the biggest risk is, right? And it's not happened yet, right? But if you have a company that comes to market with all the right money behind them and access the aftermarket products, which a few of these companies that are getting spooled up do, then assuming a consumer engages, and I've got some ideas on how that might happen. But assuming a consumer engages in the process, what will happen is they'll say, okay, look, you're 6 months into a 72-month finance. You got 66 payments left, right? You bought credit, life, accident, health, tire, wheel, right? And you're at whatever, 7.9% finance, right? Your payment's X. You're going to have 66 payments left. You're going to have the exact same coverage you've got now. Your payment's going to go down $100 a month. Click here or sign here, right? And then what they'll do is they'll end up canceling the existing products. And when they cancel the existing products, the consumer gets a prorated refund for the product. The dealership gets a prorated chargeback on all those products. That prorated refund that the consumer gets for the product is cash that they can use to reduce the amount financed, right? Because if the products that they're selling them for less money at a lower rate, then the payment comes way down. And then you end up with chargeback provisions on the dealership for the aftermarket products, and the lending institution that wrote the paper is going to miss out on the revenue to cover the reserve that was paid to the store. If it happens in the first 90 days, the dealership will get hit for the whole thing. If it doesn't, then they're going to get hit for the aftermarket product chargebacks, but there's still a huge exposure for the dealerships if those transactions are written in such a way where a company like this could come in and save the consumer enough money to make them want to redo it.
Well, again, so it's just a matter of trying to figure out what products that customer purchased and what's in that loan
They'll
so
tell
they
you.
can cancel that, cut it out. Is there going to be any technology you think that might make it a little bit easier for these companies to, be able to determine what kind of products are in that particular loan? Like, for example, dealer can pretty much obviously determine the products that are in their loan to be able to cancel those products to use as down payment, et cetera, on the next loan. But what about these other companies? Would they be able to determine what products are actually in those loans to be able to cut that product out and redo and upsell additional products, upgrade the products?
I don't know, to be honest with you. I don't know what technology exists to determine all the different elements outside of the vehicle that were associated with the transaction. What we're kind of seeing in the scuttlebutt is that they're not going to have to do the research. It's going to be more of a pull marketing. I think what we're going to see is something very similar to the personal injury lawyer type advertising. Have you purchased a car recently?
Oh,
If you
wow.
have, you may be entitled to financial compensation. Right. And I think that's how they're going to be pulling the consumers in. And if a consumer says, wow, okay, what am I entitled to? Well, we think we save you $100 a month. Send us your stuff. They'll know right away exactly the transaction, the lender, every product that was sold, how much they paid for it, what company has it, and all that stuff. And they'll know how to cancel those products because all that information associated with the instructions for canceling those products is baked right in the products that the paper for the products they purchased. So if those companies are successful in pulling consumers into their ecosystem, they won't have to buy access to that data. It'll be provided to them from the consumer.
Okay, so a dealer could very well be able to also access that information as well, you think, or not?
Well, the dealer will have that information on the
Well,
web.
for themselves, but let's say for an example, because I'm thinking through outside the box here. So we have a customer, and so this is something that you and I talked about, that I'm also offering dealers the ability to do refi in-house without doing originating the loan, right? To pretty much offer the lead to a broker exchange network type thing. But so if they had their own products, it's just as easy, right? You know exactly what products the customer took advantage of, and or if in the event it is a existing auto loan, we may not necessarily know what products are on that existing auto loan. Does that make sense without the customer or
Yeah,
contract?
exactly. Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, but I do see where if in the event the dealer had the technology internally um, to be able to determine different lending options that would be available to the customer to refi. And then from there, if in the event we determine what products are actually on that existing auto loan that we potentially could maybe cancel, to utilize that cancellation is money down on their next car, on the new car. And then, of course, reducing the payment on the existing auto loan, which in turn will help to budget that new car payment.
Yeah. So I think as long as there's a new or a change of keys, so to speak, right, where you're handling it as a trade, I don't think that's going to ruffle any feathers. I suspect that there's going to be some restrictions on the dealerships for just refinancing, especially for sure if it's one they sold, right? Because they sell a car, they mark the rate up. Customer makes 5 payments, say, why don't you come in with refinancing and save you some money?
Well, we
Right.
don't want to do that. I mean, we
Yeah.
don't want to ruffle
So, and I don't,
feathers.
and I'm not suggesting that the dealerships would do that, but I am suggesting that a lending institution might look at it that way. I don't want people to mark it up and then, get past the chargeback window and then all of a sudden drop their payment when you hold the bag. So I suspect that there's language in the dealer agreements with the lending institutions that prevent them from doing that anyway.
Well, there is. Well, the lender agreements stipulate that you cannot, they don't allow refinancing. And that is the reason why dealers, for the most part, don't do it. However, that means, again, that the dealer has little to no control when it comes to helping a customer to reduce that car payment and or to help them budget for a new car purchase.
Yeah, you're right. And it's a problem, I think, right?
And their
Uh,
hands are tied.
huh?
Dealers, I mean,
Oh,
a
their hands
dealer's
are
hands
tied?
are tied. Yes.
Yeah, maybe, listen, every time there's any kind of an imbalance, there's always an activity of some description or event that either tries to get an imbalance, but typically it doesn't. It swings it the other way, right? I've been in this space forever, right, since
I know.
1988, and it used to be that on finance contracts, chargeback provisions ran the entire length of the contract. And when September 11th happened and all the 0% financing programs came out, there were dealers that were going out of business because $100, $200, $300, $400,000 a month in chargeback provisions, and it was a force that was completely outside of their control. So the dealer community, squeaky wheel, right? I mean, there was kind of
Yeah.
anarchy, and that's what changed the policy. That's one of the main reasons that changed the policy a long time ago. Well, now you got the exact opposite dynamic, which is, okay, there's no chargeback provisions after 3 or 4 payments. There's no inventory. We're marking the rate way, way, way up, right? And a lot of these transactions are just getting repossessed or are going to be getting repossessed. And there's a huge concern about that coming up. So the dealers paid the reserve. The lending institutions are going to be taking hits like Countrywide took a while back, right?
Oh, I remember that. Yeah.
And then there's going to be a correction, right? And we don't know what that looks like, right? But when there's enough pain on one segment and the seesaw is imbalanced, the seesaw has to balance and it never finds equilibrium. It always goes the other way. And then the guy who was sitting on the ground having all the great time, he's the one that gets jettisoned, right? Which is what, kind of what's happening. And that's coming. We just don't know exactly how the lending institutions are going to, what their action is going to be. It could be that no more chargeback or no more rate markups, or we'll bring back chargeback provisions, or there's going to be some other weirdness or whatever. Who knows? But we do know that as soon as there's enough pain and enough expense on one side, equilibrium's lost, and it's got to come back into play. And it always does since the beginning of time with business. It always does. And the automotive space is exactly the same way. Downside of the automotive space is it's not responsive, it's reactive, right? We never
I know.
you never sit down and say, okay, here's all the things that could possibly go wrong if we do this. We're saying, okay, we're going to do this because it's going to take this pain away, right? And like, okay, we did. And then you look and you're like, oh, well, why is everything on fire, right? What happened? So that's just how it works.
So we have, I don't know, hopefully Stephen's still here, but I see exactly, where you're going with that. But I also see where dealers have a tendency to keep doing what they've always been doing and hope for a better result. Like you said, Christ, I've been in the business for a long, long time, right? And I get it. I'm probably more reactive than I am proactive, but I'm looking at this and I'm saying, okay, we've got to do something about it. We have to change the way that we're thinking about this business, and it can't be short-term thinking. Or you're right, lenders are going to go, you keep going short-term on me. we're not doing this 90-day. In fact, I'll tell you, GM Financial, they're offering I think $250 on the front end, and you do a $250 on the front end if the deal makes its way through GM Financial. But here again, they just lost out on their 90-day. It's now 6 months to
Yeah.
and the dealers are like, wait a minute. So now they're changing up. They're changing the way that they're doing business, and dealers have to be more proactive and realize, how do we stop this? How do we stop the bleeding? How do we make it so that customers can budget these vehicles, that we're not repoing these cars? To me, maybe the lender is there's somebody else that's reaching out to these customers, right? Like you said,
Yeah.
they're seeing the ability to reduce those car payments.
There's a bunch of companies coming out of the woodwork, and all of them are having, fairly similar business models, right? Which is, let's go restructure the transaction. And, we're kind of neutral, right? I mean, we're kind of Switzerland. We're completely neutral. We calculate payments, and those payments could be, holdback plus $100, and at the buy rate with no aftermarket products, and they could be 110% of MSRP, max rate, max products, everything else. Our job is to crunch the numbers and say, okay, here's the very best solution for what you asked for, right? And we like being in that position, but we're seeing so much stuff because we power a bunch of different industries, right? That or different segments of the industry, that it's bringing a lot of concerns, and I love the automotive space. My dad was in it before I ever met my mom. So I think it's important for us to say, hey, if we're really seeing a potential derailing of a big train here, I think it's important to bring it to the dealer body's attention and say, manage your expectations and look to make sure that you don't have an exposure, or you're not continuing to exacerbate an exposure you already have, because maybe there's ways to protect yourself. But I think the ones who just completely ignore all the warning signs may end up being hurt pretty bad here in the next not too distant future. I don't think it's going to happen instantly, but I think the next 6 to 18 months, we're going to see some crazy stuff, and the stuff we've never seen before. And we've gotten a preview of some of the things that are coming, and they're very, very crafty and clever. So it's going to be interesting. And I think these companies will make a killing if they pull it off.
Well, I know that they're going to make a killing, and they will pull it off because more and more, because many dealers they're not feeling the pinch just yet. They're behind. I'm just going to say it how the pastures have been green for a couple years now, and I'm kind of liking what I like, and it's hard, especially when someone is doing so well, to say, okay, maybe you have to change the way that you're thinking, because granted, you've done really well with what you've been able to do, and they have, let's face it. But now it's like, I don't know, you got to change some of that behavior up, and make it a point to make sure that you have your due diligence, your skill set, your processes and best practices in place. Otherwise, let me tell you something, you're going to get slammed. That's why, frankly, I'm offering dealers, I got into this and it fell into my lap. I tell you, and I had been thinking through refis, and that I've always kind of been thinking through different scenarios, consumer-based ways to do, do better business for our consumers. And so this got into my lap on this refi, and the more I dug into it and figured out where we were, I'm thinking, oh my gosh, you've got refi companies lining up left and right, and dealers need to figure out a better way to be able to somehow put themselves in a position where they can offer refi and retain their customer. Because the very minute that other outside lender offers that customer refi, that's out of the dealership's marketplace.
Well, maybe, right? As long as if the dealership sold the car new, or sold the consumer the car, they still kind of own the relationship, assuming that they
to some degree.
So, it's not,
But if they're selling different products outside the dealership's,
yeah,
again, product, they lose that. And so I think it's important to make sure that, hey, that we're not losing some of these products that we're selling. That, it's all about, well, the reinsurance and everything else that goes along with that. So if I can keep the customer from refinancing with this other lender outside of my control somewhat and keeping my products intact, I think that'd be a better way to go.
yeah, I think that's finding a balance between profitability and kind of risk mitigation, right? Because what's going to motivate the consumer to go uh, reply to one of these ads or something they see online or whatever is, my payments are way higher than I think they should be. I should explore this, right? If the payments are high, but they're fair in the eyes of the consumer, they may never engage in that process in the first place, or they might find themselves in a position where, okay, I got to jump through a few hoops, end up with an extra inquiry on my bureau, and I'm gonna save $7 a month. It's not worth it, right? So it's kind of finding a balance between how much do we make now, or how much can we make now, or how much do we make now and retain a customer and the whole transaction, and maybe get them again and again and again, right? And
Yeah.
and I think that's been a balance that the automotive industry has been trying to find forever. There's some dealerships that make huge grosses on on consumers and don't see them often, and then you have dealerships on the opposite end of the spectrum where they get somebody in their quote unquote family of consumers, and they never leave. They bring their daughters, they bring their friends, their neighbors, and they get car after car after car after car after car. And you don't have to give the cars away to do that. You just charge a fair price and cover them up with service and that kind of stuff, and a customer will have some loyalty. But again, that balance is for the dealer community to find. And I know there are a lot of big groups that are throwing a ton of effort and intelligence and trying to figure out, how do we find this balance, right? And how do we accommodate the needs of the consumers that are coming in the relatively near future, right? Because we don't know what it looks like 18 months from now. We just know it looks different than it does now. Everybody's kind of trying to make their guess, but a lot of these companies are trying to figure out, okay, how do we make sure we can address those needs when things happen? Because if we're not ready, we're going to be scrambling.
Well, here again, I think it's really important that that dealers recognize first and foremost that the industry is changing, and there's a lot of other providers that are available, ready and willing to help a customer to reduce the terms, right, and or payments at moments notice, and then maybe too, it would benefit them to be more proactive in their training when it comes to making sure that, hey, we're looking long term here. I've seen some of the best pay plans and I've seen some of the worst pay plans. Pay plan to me always dictates behavior. What do we hope to achieve?
Sure.
And that pay plan means it's more focused to me on product and consistent product pricing, not jamming somebody one product versus another, what I can ever get away with, depending on whatever the lender allows me to get away with. And I know you guys want to shoot me when I say that, but I got to tell you, it is about consistent product strategies, product pricing, and that, the minute that, we take advantage, gouge customers when we can, it's going to come back to us. It just does. Or if in the event, we are charging a higher rate because what? We're getting paid on the total pot, and it doesn't matter which way I get it. So it's reserve. Oh, wait a minute. Maybe vehicle service contract, because dealers want, they're getting compensated reinsurance. So it's vehicle service contracting rate. And that's it. And it's like, okay, well, I'm going to make my money, and here I go. Those are the dealers. And I hope that you're listening in, because those are the dealers that are probably getting hit more on these chargebacks than the dealers who focus more on product and product pricing consistency. Do you agree with that?
So I agree that training is super important. I think that training is going to be more important in the very near future than it's been in a very long time, because there's a whole bunch of new regulations that are coming down the pike, and I don't think we can stop them. So we have to get that right. I'm kind of neutral on how I think compensation plans should be structured. I agree with you 100%. You know, we have a saying around here: your pay plan is your job description, right? Because people
Yeah.
always do what feeds their family best. We've worked with a bunch of different dealer groups. The ones who have seemed to have the most success, at least from an overall comp outlook, are the ones that pay everybody associated with the transaction a percentage of the total gross, right? That way everybody's pulling the exact same chain, right? We're not taking money out of the front to put it in the back. We're not, my dad used to have this saying, so why would you pay a guy a commission to sell $1 to a bank for 75 cents, right? And, and he was old school, car business, but, compensation plans, if they're going to dictate behavior, they're going to dictate behavior. But it still comes down to a management process, right? Which is, how are we going to price stuff, and how are we going to transact with our consumers? What terms and conditions are we willing to transact under, and all the rest of that stuff? And some of that is going to be dictated by the government here before too long, right? Which is going to be very restrictive, we think, right? There's going to be all kinds of weird things that we have to do in order to be able to talk to a consumer about monthly payments and all that, if all these regulations pass. And I think that's going to hurt the sales process until somebody figures out, okay, how do we really streamline this? So the training is going to be a big piece, but how you compensate your people.
I think it's part of the equation. It's like people, to get certain behaviors in place, you have to. I think part of that is the pay plan. I just do, and it should be part of the culture, frankly, in our best practice and expectations. And every time that we can strive to have a consistent process that we put in place that can be properly managed is just a smart way of doing business, because you can always have that one player in there that does it the way that they want to do it. So in order to not, to be able to manage that, you have a set culture of consistent best practices that everyone supports. And
yeah, we call those standard operating procedures here, right? And
okay, yes,
and I think a lot of dealers have things where, okay, this is how we, this is our first pencil, second pencil, third pencil steps. This is how we, how we train our sales team. This is how we act in the finance office. This is, how we pitch aftermarket products. If we use menu selling, this is how we price it, all that kind of stuff.
that's right.
And I think consistency with that is super important for a lot of reasons, not the least of which it's easy for your team to stay focused, right? Because they know exactly we know what the next step is. It's almost like, and you call tech support, they don't really know what's going on. They're just reading the script. The sales guys who are really professional, they understand the process. They understand how to relay that to the consumer in a way where the consumer is willing to receive it, and as long as that's consistent, I think it protects the dealer. And I think it also makes the, all the different players, so to speak, from the dealership who are involved with the transaction, it makes their lives easier, right? It's just, everything's, there's a roadmap. There's a roadmap to success. There's a roadmap to the sale. And if it's defined well, if it's a good roadmap, it should work. If you put a bad roadmap together, you're probably not going to get great results.
Well, right. So I have always been, and I mean, from the time that I was working with JM&A a long, long time ago. But when we were working in the AutoNation stores, when we first implemented menu selling in those stores, and the consistent best practices that we put in place really made a big difference. It just did. From the time that customer walked in that store to the time that they, to desking, to from sales to desking to finalizing that transaction, out at the showroom, at a kiosk in the middle of a showroom, and we're presenting this menu. And it did make a big, big difference. And frankly, during my travel time with JM&A, traveling all over the United States, I realized quickly that a dealer that had some sort of a process is always going to fare better than a dealer that didn't have a process. It just, I mean, and it doesn't even have to be a great process. It's got to be something.
Sure.
And it makes all the difference. It does make all the difference. And versus someone who just flies by the seat of their pants. And I think that that's what I'm seeing a lot more. I'm seeing there's really no consistency as far as process is concerned. Desking, we're just slamming deals. We're just shotgunning those deals to the bank, and without really kind of thinking through validation, determining excuse me, some of the an idea of understanding lender versus what that customer actually qualifies for.
Yeah.
So see, excuse water.
Car business got you all choked up.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So
I love Steve Apicella's.
go ahead and read it. Why I choke here.
Yeah, there's a whole. Let me put my glasses on so I can actually read it, so I don't sound like a fourth grader. There's a whole community that thrives on dealers' inability, misunderstanding, or reluctance to refinance loans. The aggressive third-party companies do the refi and resell F&I products. The problem is obvious. The dealer isn't a part of that engagement. They're exposed to chargebacks, and the consumer/relationship is lost. So you're absolutely correct, Steve, 100%. And that's one of the things that kind of we were talking about is, I think that there's a huge storm brewing on exactly that. And, outside of the chargeback provisions and all the rest of the stuff, it just creates a mess in the space, and the dealers, at least understanding that that's an exposure, right? When you have these types of contracts in your portfolio, you may not be able to count all the money that was associated with that transaction because it might get asked back, right? The banks, the aftermarket companies, all that kind of stuff, they might be asking for some of it back. And it's going to be, when that does happen, that's going to be expensive. And, if it's like it was 20 years ago, there's going to be a lot of dealers today who will be ex-dealers in the not too distant future because of the massive amounts of chargebacks that they experience and maybe not being able to weather that financial storm.
Well, I think that their expectations, I don't think that they've managed that F&I office or have a really truly understanding of how these chargebacks can make a big difference. And so I often ask them, well, if you have so much chargebacks during that month, what did you really earn the previous month? So I was always brought up a lot different than what's going on in the industry because the dealer that I worked for always made me accountable to the chargebacks. Tell me why I have a chargeback this month, Becky. Where did that come from?
Sure.
Nowadays, that's really not happening at all.
Yeah.
There's no accountability other than, I'm not trying to be maybe a little bit of a smart, but when I hear that, oh gosh, it's the cost of doing business. This is why we have these chargebacks. And that's, I'm telling you, a very common remark when it comes to, well, Beck, come on. We have been hitting it hard. We're running some massive, great performance. Of course, we're going to have chargebacks. That's just the way it goes. What do you say to that?
Well, to be perfectly honest with you, I'm probably not qualified to answer that one because we don't have that lens into the store. We see what's being quoted. We understand, what kind of markups are being presented down to a very granular level, but also, kind of an aggregated level. We can say, okay, specialized programs aren't being quoted very often because the rate can't be marked up. All these programs are being marked up, and then these aftermarket products are being included. But what happens after we pass the baton? So basically, once the customer signs on the dotted line and that deal's gone, our job's done. So we don't really have any. We don't have a dog in that race. So
yeah, it makes sense. Well, that is sort of the comment, that I sometimes get in that, we're putting some, strong numbers on the books here, Becky. So because of that, we can expect to have a higher percentage of chargebacks. And so I'm like, okay, well, quit pounding on your chest saying that you're running $3,000 a car when you're likely not. And, at the end of the day, you're probably, like you're maybe $2,500 per car or less. Really depends. I mean, so can we get down to the nitty gritty and really take a look at your true performance?
Yeah, I mean that's I think if you did a gap accounting on it or a quality of earnings report on it, you look and say, okay, well, what did we make here? What did it cost us to make that? What's that average look like? I think mathematically that's not too hard to figure out. But again, that's that's downstream from our visibility. The
No,
thing
I,
that's
I, I
yeah,
get it. I get it.
yeah,
Our whole thing when I was working with JM&A, and from the time I founded my company in 2001, and what I really helped dealers try to understand was, reserve is part of the deal. There's no doubt about it. I get that. But where should we be really driving that performance? Is it product driven or is it reserve driven? And I often believed that if in the event it were fair, we're not trying to, you know, um, be that rate hog, um, and it's more driven on product to some degree. I'm not, again, I'm not be careful, where we're going with that, but I want to see a more of a 60%, 40% when it comes to profit driven percentages. And generally, when we do that, we're going to see less chargebacks because the customer sees more value in their contract than it's all about reserve. Because I certainly can figure, I certainly think that I can get a vehicle service contract from maybe somebody else too.
yeah. I guess there's several different ways to look at it. For me, if you take the emotion out of it completely and you just look at it strictly as a math problem, every deal that leaves a dealership essentially goes down exactly the same way, and that's the customer pays so much up front and they pay so much a month for so many months. So if we take that commitment from the customer and we back into it and figure out, okay, what's the most profit we can make on this transaction, regardless of what the structure, which lending institution we send it to, and how do we structure it in order to maximize profit, that's going to generate one result for every single transaction, right? And that one result, all of it should be mathematically in the front end first, right? Because you get 100 cents on those dollars, right? And then you find this, okay, there's a balance between should we go with the reserve or do we go with aftermarket products? Depends on the cost of the aftermarket products and how much they impact the payment versus how much the split in the reserve impacts the payment, right? Because if you looked at it mathematically and say you had a 50-50 split with the bank, and it's not how it is anymore, but 50-50 split with the bank, right? If I've got a warranty that costs me $200 and I sell it for $400, that has about the same impact as making $200 in reserve because we paid reserve because we had to have $400 in reserve. Once you sell that warranty for $500, $600, $700, you're no longer splitting that part with the bank. You end up making more money on the warranty. And then, if you look at the emotional side of it or just the widget side of it, the customer is getting something for their money other than just a higher monthly payment. But if you take into consideration that if the customer makes 3 or 4 payments on the finance, there's not chargeback provisions anymore like there used to be, then from an exposure standpoint, I'm not saying this is how I like to do it, but I'm just saying mathematically, from an exposure standpoint, you're much more efficient to get all of it in the rate and not do it with a product that can be canceled at any time during its life and have an appropriate chargeback on it, even though the consumer is not getting anything additional except for a higher monthly payment. So you can't take the emotion and the customer satisfaction portion out of the equation in the automotive space, right? You can't. You're not selling, just one-time widgets. You're trying to sell a relationship with a dealership, and then you have to figure out, okay, what is that balance? A customer is going to pay this much. What's going to make them feel like they want to come back to us, not tomorrow or the next day, but 58 months from now, right? Or 45
Yeah.
months from now, right? And
Right.
and how do we find that balance? And that balance, I think, is the most difficult thing to attain in the whole ecosystem, right? Some dealers And some dealer groups, excuse me,
So
now
you
you got
got
me
it.
back. Yes,
Don't-
contagious,
There's
contagious
something
over
in the air.
here.
I don't know what.
Yeah. But some dealers and dealer groups have done a pretty good job finding that balance. Some of them have done an outstanding job finding that balance.
Yes, they have.
Some of them aren't looking for the balance. They're looking at it strictly from a mathematic and an exposure standpoint and say, how do we generate the most profit with the least exposure? And we don't have a ton of cars. These customers die, we'll get more, right? And then you got the exact opposite end where the guys who are really focusing on the whole experience. And then there's a bunch of people in between. Mathematically, I know which one's right. Long-term business one, I have my concept of which one's right. And, at the end of the day, what's right is what makes the guy feel good whose name's on the building and makes him think that, okay, this is the best for me and my family, my employees. Right. And that varies by all of them, and
It does vary by everyone, as what they see. And, it's just like the past 2 years, we have only so much inventory, and you make a valid point.
Yeah.
Because again, we're going to make the most that we can from each vehicle that we're selling. And some are
I love
taking advantage
I
of it
love
more
the
than
fact
others.
I love the fact that it's varied for us, right? Because if everybody did it exactly the same and every lender did it exactly the same, there'd be no reason for what we do, And this industry is gloriously discombobulated. I mean, it is such a mess. It has been a mess forever. The only consistent thing in the entire automotive space is there's zero consistency amongst anything. And that chaos, organizing that chaos has carved out fantastic technologies and companies for lots of players in the space. We're one of them, but we're one of a whole bunch who, have a job because the space is so screwy, so. And
Well,
it's going to get crazier here very soon, which, maybe, I don't have much hair left to pull out, but at least I'll have some job security, right? So.
well, exactly. So one of the things, I certainly try to help dealers with is really help to streamline, be a lot more efficient in what we're doing, in presenting um, and helping to streamline, um, utilize better deal structure to maximize profits without a whole reducing liability. Spit it out, Becky. And
It's easy
gosh,
for you to say.
it's like, oh, come on. You've been doing this forever, long in a day. And it is about doing that and helping to have that best process in place to be able to create more efficiencies while at the same time maximize profits. And so, again, this is how I somehow not only managed to get into this digital transformation, because I do believe in that. And I'm not doing that to um, to take away from the to take away from what's happening in the I'm there to help to be more efficient in what we're providing to the consumer.
Yeah. Listen, digital transformation is coming. It's driven more so by the consumer than anybody else, right? And COVID accelerated it very rapidly. Consumers couldn't leave their house. Amazon taught all of us, or actually, I think probably eBay early on kind of taught all of us how to do it. Amazon perfected it, and now we're all shopping for everything, online. And consumers want to understand, or maybe even do most of it online. But the whole digital transformation is that if I'm told something up here and it's different when I get here, I'm not happy. If it's consistent, I might engage and be happy, even if it's much more expensive than I kind of thought, because my expectations were managed every step of the way, and it was consistent and transparent. So it's not like it's coming. It is here, and it is not going anywhere. So
Well, I like it not to take away, like I said, I think it allows the customer to feel that they're in control of the buying process. And when the customer feels as if they're in control of the buying process, they're going to feel um, or think that the dealer is a lot more credible.
yeah, and I'm not so sure that I agree 100% with you that digital transformation makes the customer feel that they're in control of the buying process, but I think it makes them feel like they're in control of their research portion of it, right? And as long as the dealerships are able to kind of dictate how they want to transact, basically quote my payments my way, and give the consumer the tools to be able to goof around with them, right? I don't want a $500 a month payment. Okay, well, you need $700 more cash to get this payment. You can do your sliders, and it doesn't matter. You have a cheaper payment, a lot of cash, or a higher payment, a little bit of cash. The profitability and the structure and the stuff dictated by the dealership, if that remains the same, then the consumer is in control of how they want to transact, right? Not necessarily control the transaction.
Well, yeah, what I meant, was okay. There's there's takes two to tango, right?
100%, 100%. I agree with that for sure.
But having the self-desking capability to be able to do that. Now, some are more enriched than others, right?
Yeah.
Some offer more options
Mhm.
than a simple calculator.
Yeah,
And then
and
from
and
online
and
to in dealership is different.
and some of them give the consumer the ability to end up getting super excited about a payment that the dealership could never ever achieve in their wildest dreams, and that's when the whole process falls apart.
Right.
And that really came to light at the onset of COVID, right? Because all of a sudden now, okay, it's broken. Well, it's broken because there wasn't a huge demand. Nobody was driving it, and it wasn't focused on right. Now it's okay. You quoted me that here. I get here. It's different to the point to where, and a lot of the times, like we said before, it's still not the dealership's fault. Some of these digital retailing companies that they're hiring, paying all this money for these leads and all this stuff, they're not quoting the dealer's payments their way, right? And it's gotten to the point where FTC is getting involved, saying you quoted them something here and it's different over here, and everybody's like, well, what if everybody's doing this?
Yeah.
And it's just a disconnect. It's anytime you accelerate a process in a bit of an archaic industry, you accelerate a process too rapidly, things are going to break. And the automotive industry was pretty broken from a technological standpoint long before COVID hit. And when it was forced to rapidly evolve, a lot of the players in the space just were incapable of evolving. And that lack of evolution just created chaos everywhere. And, it's the dealer ends up looking like a fool, even though he wasn't responsible for the disconnect, because somebody said, Rusty's payments are this, and they came and talked to Rusty, and Rusty, no, your payments are this. And they go, you lied to me over there. I didn't tell you that. They told you what I was going to say, and they told you wrong. The consumer doesn't care about any of that stuff. What the consumer needs is consistency, transparency, regardless of what that price is, regardless of whether there's a ton of product, regardless of there's a ton of rate, regardless if it's way over window sticker, it needs to be consistent. So when the consumer goes to transact, they're not surprised and they're not mad. And until we get there, the government's going to keep coming in. Everybody's going to keep coming in. Everything's going to be a mess, and we're going to, still have a job. So that's okay.
Well, I think that what we can do is, I do believe that we can create an environment where we are utilizing these efficiencies, technology to create a more robust process from the time the customer, and it's just not online. What I'm talking about is from online to what takes place when that customer gets into the dealership. And that's the self-desking ownership that I'm talking about.
100%.
When they feel as if they're in